Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Beyond Labels with your hosts, Joel Salatin, that would be me, the farmer, and Dr. Sina McCullough, our favorite researcher and, and sleuth on all things nutritional and living, who has just found new guidelines about vitamin D, which we all know is the sunshine vitamin. And she's going to share what she's found about new recommendations for vitamin D. Sina,
Uh,
take it away.
Thanks, Joel. Okay, so this is actually a really cool story. There are new guidelines that are turning conventional wisdom on its head. They're offering surprising new recommendations that could actually impact your decision about taking vitamin D and even testing your vitamin D level. As you mentioned, Joel, it is the sunshine vitamin because we could make vitamin D in our skin. But vitamin D has nonetheless become increasingly popular because of its potential role in disease reversal. In fact, about 18% of adults now report taking vitamin D supplements, and more than 10 million blood tests are performed annually in the US in order to check vitamin D levels. However, the Endocrine Society has come out with its 2024 guidelines. They are now advising against routine vitamin D screening. So that means they're advising against routine vitamin D testing, and they are against routine supplementation for certain populations, including adults aged 19 to 74, right? So 19 to 74-year-olds now, they're saying that they're against routine supplementation, that basically you should meet the RDA level and not supplement. This is a major shift from the 2011 guidelines. And we can dive into what the specific recommendations are per age group. But I want to just take a moment and share why I think this is such an amazing story. Okay. So I looked into why is there this major shift in the guidelines? And what these researchers are saying, and this is a panel of experts. They're experts in clinical practice, but they're also experts in creating like reference ranges, right? These screening protocols that we use in modern medicine. So this panel of experts came together and they analyzed randomized controlled trials that were trying to find a connection between vitamin D intake and disease prevention or disease management, including improvements in disease. So what they said
Well,
was
what are the major diseases that vitamin D is purported to deal with? I mean, can you give three or four that are
ex-
major diseases that we would link up, that we would think about vitamin D when we hear the disease?
exactly. Okay, excellent, Joel. So there's been an association between vitamin D intake and a myriad of diseases and disorders, including the whole category of autoimmune diseases, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, musculoskeletal diseases, including bone loss, fractures, infectious diseases, as well as fatigue and also mental imbalances. So, that whole slew of mental disorders that we think of. So there's just some broad oversweeping categories. So you can see why vitamin D has become so popular, because in these epidemiological studies, which are basically population studies that use observations, okay? In these epidemiological studies, they are showing associations between low levels of vitamin D's and all of those categories of diseases. So it seems like it's this primary factor in disease formation and progression. Oh, as well as cancers, which are usually an end stage autoimmune disease. So I clump those, generally speaking, into the autoimmune category. Okay. So practically everything you can think of, if disease wise, has some kind of association with vitamin D. It's now the catch all vitamin. Okay. But what these researchers found out was that when they looked at randomized controlled studies, right? These are more of a gold standard for us. It's not just observing what happens in a population. A randomized controlled study, in contrast, is one where you have a population and you do an intervention, Like you have a placebo group that gets no vitamin D, and then you have your experimental group that's getting a certain dose of vitamin D, and you have an outcome that you've measured. Okay. When you're looking at those randomized controlled trials, they're saying that there is no consistent cause and effect relationship, that the current data that we have in randomized controlled trials does not support the relationship between vitamin D and preventing or ameliorating diseases. Okay.
So you don't have to get in the sun.
Well, they're talking about supplementation. So they're specifically talking
Okay.
about supplementing, you know.
All right.
Now, what also was really fascinating about these new guidelines is that usually when you're coming up with like a screening protocol, it's like when you go into your doctor's office and you say, I want you to test my vitamin D level, they're testing your blood for a 25 hydroxy vitamin D level. And then what they do is they compare that to some standard threshold, right? And usually that target level is 30 nanograms per mil. That's a generalized target level that you want to be above, you know, at least 30 nanograms, preferably a little bit above. Okay. Well, here's the thing. According to the Endocrine Society's research, they are no longer endorsing that targeted level of 30 nanograms per mil. They're saying that there's actually no consensus on what the optimal level of blood vitamin D is. That there is no agreed upon vitamin D level in the blood that has been showing to prevent disease. And even in some studies where they had low vitamin D status, like the subjects had low vitamin D status, and there was actually no clear cutoff point for when, if they supplemented and they showed improvements, there is no standard level that they could identify that's a good cutoff point, like a good threshold to measure. They also said the target is probably going to change based on the specific disease that you're looking at, which makes a lot of sense, right? It also changes based on your environment and your own internal needs. So like you said, if you're indoors, if you're stressing, if your diet is poor in vitamin D, if you're in a sun poor climate. So there's all these individualized variables, which goes into what you and I constantly talk about on this program is personalized medicine, right? There's no one size fits all. So that's the first point. They are no longer endorsing that target 30 nanograms per mil. They're saying that it's kind of an arbitrary number that's just been thrown out there that we don't really know if that's the actual target we should be reaching. And the second thing is they're no longer endorsing specific vitamin D levels to measure or to determine if somebody is sufficient in vitamin D, insufficient, or deficient. They're actually saying that there is no consensus on the definition of the level that is associated with vitamin D deficiency.